Hello, this is Through a Therapist's Eyes. I am Chris Gazdick, and he who is not with us tonight is Mr. Craig Graves. I'm a mental health and substance abuse therapist. He is an unbeatable mind coach. Tonight, you get the pleasure of having Mr. Producer. We're going to call you the guest co-host for now. Is that okay with you, man?
That works.
All right, you good with that? So he is the guest co-host. What should we say, Neil? I mean, the guest co-host, and what do we follow that up with? The tech guy.
Yeah, the tech guy's perfect.
Does that work for you?
Perfect.
I have a book, The Unbeatable. Oh, no, he has the coaching, The Unbeatable Mind, and I have the book, Re-Understanding Emotions and Becoming Your Best Self. His website is wininyourmind.com, and you can check all of this stuff out on throughatherapistseyes.com. So this is not the delivery of therapy services in any way. You can also check out BetterHelp. What can you say? I just called you Craig, man. I got to get this.
It's a hard habit to break.
Who am I talking to?
It's Neil.
All right. Tell us about BetterHelp on the website, man.
BetterHelp, it's a online therapy service that partnered with us to help sponsor the show. You sign up through us, not only do you get a lot of great mental health help, but we do get a kickback. We do get a referral fee, you would say.
Money.
So, yes, money. So it keeps these shows free for you guys, and it helps us build better shows, get better guests, and go from there.
And Craig likes to say, you can do therapy right out of your own home. I mean, it's really pretty cool.
All over the country.
Yeah, and the world.
Yes.
I think so. So this is the human emotional experience. Mr. Neil, we want to figure this thing out together if you're down with that.
Yeah, I definitely am.
All right, so I'm going to make a little bit of an announcement. We're playing around with different routines. If you've noticed out there, we had a lot of shows. We kind of did a little experiment where we were doing 20-minute segments, 3 of them, and I think we're going back to the hour kind of time frame and just doing one show per week. We've kind of made that determination, right?
Yeah, we're going to change it back just to make it easier for you guys. The format that Chris does, the 1 hour just works a lot better for what he covers with his topics to give his guest a better chance to elaborate on what they're on the show to talk about. So yeah, we're going to go back to the 1 hour.
And I'm not going to lie, it was messing with me.
Yeah, it was after 100 plus shows and you all of a sudden switch. Yeah, it was rough.
I was like, I'm sitting there in mid-conversation thinking, oh, wait a minute, time's up. I guess we got to go to the next segment.
Yes.
So, and we're going to change, I think, the day. We have agreed that we're going to go and hit it on Mondays.
Yeah, I think we're going to start Mental Health Mondays. Start your brain on the right side, kind of something like that.
Yeah. Work out on a Monday. We'll call Mental Health Monday, even in Mental Health Month. We'll do Mental Health Mondays throughout the year.
Yep, exactly.
And it'll give you some time through the week to catch up and check things out, follow up on a Tuesday or Wednesday throughout the week. So yeah, we're going to start the week out with you guys rather than hanging out all week. We're going to go back to that, and I think that'll be better. So, Mr. Co-host, what do you want to do? What do you want to talk about this evening?
I think we're talking about borderline personality disorder.
Ooh, good choice. Good choice. I chose that, guys, just so you know. But yeah, we haven't done a whole lot of shows, on specific diagnoses for a little while, and that's part of what we want to cover on blowing up stereotypes, myths, and stigmas about mental health. And I tell you, talking with my clients through the week as I was getting ready and really gearing my brain to this, dude, like I was surprised at how many people kind of said and explained, like, wow, that's really interesting because, I have a friend that is, or I was married to people before, and I was stunned at how commonly people have heard of borderline personality disorder and how many people have dealt with it. If not, certainly I know how many people have diagnosed with this. So, boy, this is a really cool topic that, as you know, when I'm doing specific diagnostic shows, I like to generalize it to people, and I'll do that right off the get-go in that one of the things that's a factor with borderline personality disorder is it's like severe forms of Gottman's abandonment insecurities, right? And it carries a lot of those characteristics and a bit to an extreme. So it really applies to people that are just sort of maybe intensely abandonment, but not quite, meeting criteria and whatnot that we look for borderline personality disorder. But so it broadens out that way a little bit. I'll hit you cold like I usually do with Mr. Graves, Neil, see how you do. Did you I think you said before the mics come on, you've heard of BPD before. BPD, borderline personality disorder. So when you hear me say BPD, it's the whole borderline. So you've heard of this before?
Yeah,
Sort of?
I have a relative that at one point were diagnosed with this, and when we looked into what it was, it kind of fit them to a T
Yeah.
for the most part. I can't remember exactly the things, but I know there were certain pieces of it that's what they were like. It was like, that explains some of the personality things that they went through. They were very like, oh, yep, they do that, they do that. Oh, yep. What about that one? Yeah. So
Yeah.
yeah, so I've heard of it.
Yeah, it amazes me how, like I just said, how often people have heard of this and dealt with this in your circle. And so I think that if you're listening to this, you're going to really hear some characteristics that are going to explain a lot of what you've very likely have come across with people that have an emotional system internally that's just really varied up and down at any given day. And at any given moment, things move around for these folks. And I'm going to blow out one of the stigmas right off the get go. And we'll talk about this more, but we used to really look at BPD as being a lot more organized around, well, you've heard of the nature nurture argument in psychology, right?
Oh yeah, definitely.
Most people have heard the factor of nature being your genetics and your body, and nurture being your experiences and and whatnot. This goes to what I call the major overview of mental health, the tale of two tapes. Do you remember the tale of two tapes by chance? Because he's been around, audience, for a little while, but it's funny because I don't know what you've heard and what you haven't.
I don't remember that one.
Cool. Well, the tale of two tapes is an overview of mental health, and on the one side you've got biological realities. That's the nature side of it: genetics, exercise, nutrition, these types of things that our body drives how we feel, right? But on the other side, you have social and emotional realities, your primary life experiences, your primary life relationships, the daily stress, the grind, right? So this social and emotional blends with this biological in a dynamic way to drive in combination how people feel. Well, when it comes to BPD, even professionals in my field very much look at the nurture part of this in the life experiences. Now, it's true that oftentimes people that have BPD have had some sort of trauma, sexual, physical abuse, and whatnot, that's been a marking event or events or a period of their life. And that sets a lot of this up. But, dude, we're going to get into some neurology in a little bit that demonstrates what is a myth about BPD, that it's purely a nurture issue. It is not. I've never believed that. And now science is catching up to demonstrate that this is a lot of the nature side of things.
I mean, it makes sense. I'm a big proponent that nature is who you are, and it also dictates how you're. Nature is how you are, but even with the nurture, your nature dictates how you perceive things.
Mm-hmm.
So that nurture, I'm a big proponent with siblings. You see two siblings in same upbringing. One completely reacts completely different in the same situation as the other. So I think that both sides really play heavily into both pieces of it. You can't have one without the other affecting the other.
These wonderful people that are geeky and science-based and studies and all that I love and appreciate so much in my field that go out and do this research love twins. They love twins to study and research, like what is going on genetically and biologically that makes these people, as you just said, go completely different with very similar life experiences. It's really, really cool. And we see that with BPD. Young therapists listen out there, or therapists of old, really. This is an access to personality disorder. And these access to personality traits that people have, narcissistic personality disorder, dependent personality disorder, antisocial personality disorder. People have heard this. Antisocial personality disorder. That's a big thing that people talk about in movies and whatever. BPD is another one of these. And we still really don't even understand them. But the big point here, the big takeaway, if you will, really relates a lot to the fact that there are biological marking factors that drive the way these people are afflicted in the way that their emotions work. And we're going to go through that.
Oh, cool.
Yeah. So let's kind of get some groundwork laid. I don't like to do DSM characteristics and stuff a whole lot, so I'm going to blow through this because there's things that we want to talk about. In the name of this is why is borderline personality disorder so misunderstood? Because it is wildly misunderstood in both professionally and in the world, right? So you're looking for 5 or more of these things that we're looking for. So real quick, efforts to avoid real or imagined abandonment, right? That's the same thing as Gottman's thing, either real or perceived or imagined, right? They are really, really putting mass effort to deal with this before it even happens. Pattern of unstable and intense relationships, right? So things are classic thing that somebody would say is, "Hey, I love you. You're the greatest thing that ever happened to me in my life." And then the next day, or literally the next hour, "I can't believe I ever came to meet you because you are the worst person that I've ever met." It's like vacillating, right? Devaluing the identity disturbance. They do not see themselves the way that other people see themselves. Unstable sense of self-image, right? They're really, they could be knock dead gorgeous and feel like they're awful ugly, or all kinds of self-image issues. Impulsivity in at least 2 areas, that's self-damaging. So they'll spend money, be impulsive with sexual behavior, dangerous behavior, driving fast, just recklessness, because it's just like, hey, let's roll, let's do it, Recurrent suicidal behavior, a lot of people will get into cutting. Mood instability, it's up and down. Chronicity of feeling empty, inappropriate, intense anger. And actually, lastly, like being disassociative, which is where you have a hard time kind of focusing and whatnot. These are the things that we're looking for when we're really trying to figure out, is this person is just stressed out, anxious, or upset? These personality traits, you begin to get a sense where there can be a lot of chaos and a lot of disruption, a lot of anger, a lot of hurt because of the way that they're acting, in the way that their emotions are pouring. Okay? So I don't know if that makes a whole lot of sense to you, Neil, but I have a perfect metaphor that I will say is not my metaphor, but this metaphor I think just describes what the experience is for someone that has BPD. Okay? So if you imagine a body of water way up high, and it's got like a dam or a big door that holds this water back. The water stands for emotion. Well, randomly, totally triggered by random factors, unpredictably, this door will open up and it will crash down the ravine and absolutely like flood the land. And then equally as randomly and as unpredictably, that door will close and you're dealing with the flood that will eventually, sometimes quickly, turn into a drought, right? So it's an absolutely unpredictable nature where emotions just pour over a person. Like happy is really happy. They feel great. But boy, disappointment is like hardcore, I'm really down. The simplest way that I've thought about, if you can get into the experience of a borderline person's experience of the world, just imagine this, where whatever you're experiencing in the moment is just you know how emotions can take you one place and then another, right?
Very quickly.
I mean, we all experience that. If you can imagine when you don't have bipolar or borderline, I just slipped and out. That's perfect. If you can imagine when you don't have borderline personality disorder, and those emotions take you very quickly from one place to another. Can you imagine that that's times 5, right? Like whatever you're experiencing when you felt all chaotic and scrambled and upset. And, I was talking to somebody, they literally just dumped coffee on their keyboard while I was in a conference with them. And he was tripping. He was like, he got all rattled. And he's a very normally controlled person. And he got completely rattled. Multiply that times 5 or even more. Sometimes if it's really bad, times 10. Neil, can you imagine like really seriously like living that way every day? Where you don't, whatever you're experiencing is just flooding, like that water just floods the land.
That would be very intense and overwhelming for me personally.
Right? I mean, just stay there for a minute. Like, I try to get into understanding what people are experiencing when I'm working with them to, get into their shoes and stuff. And this is one where you've got to understand when somebody's identified and dealing with this, you just laid out an absolutely perfect word, right? What was it again? I guess?
Intense or overwhelming?
Overwhelmingly intense. How about that? I mean, it's constant. It doesn't really stop. Can you imagine how badly you just want to have peace?
Yeah, I mean, it goes back to those people who have the hiccups for a long time. That just because I had hiccups for 7 days.
Oh my gosh!
And by the end of it, even those little diaphragm, it would by the end of it, it was overwhelming. I could only imagine having your emotions and those pieces just running rampant that long. It's wearing over time.
7 days of hiccups. When was this?
When I started to get back into shape, and my body said, "I don't know if that's a good idea."
Oh my gosh!
I had a fever, and then 7 days of hiccups. So I had to take anti-spaz medicine. So I found out that I am a spaz, and I had to take medicine for it.
That's awesome.
No, it was not.
No, yeah, awesome to hear of, maybe not experience. I just mentioned the word, and I said, "Oh, that's perfect." You remember what word I said?
Bipolar.
What is the difference between bipolar disorder and borderline personality disorder? Aren't they interchangeable? Oh. Listen, if you're out there, I really want you to pay attention to the idea that particularly psychiatrists, who, no offense, they do great work. They love to prescribe medications, what we do. They're a helpful tool. They're not a solution. They love to diagnose borderline people as bipolar because it's easy to be able to say you're all the way up and then you're all the way down. And on any given day, they may be experiencing that. And so they will diagnose borderline people with bipolar. And they, even with therapists, sometimes there's a lot of interchangeability that is not really understood. Okay, here's the big difference. Because it is true to say bipolar people go up. They're either manic or hypomanic, but they're up. And then they're down in a depressed state. It's a terrible thing. And we've talked about bipolar on the show. If you want more on that, really listen to the past shows where I think the title was like, What Bipolar Is Not. And I think in that show we talked about borderline personality disorder. Because those folks will be up, manic, hypomanic, for a longer period of time, right? Weeks on end, or at least weeks on end, sometimes months on end, okay? They'll be up and manic, spending money, being impulsive, similar things that I just said, right? But bipolar people come back down in like a day or two, 3 at the very most or whatever, right? So the borderline personality disorder person goes up and down, up and down, up and down. A bipolar person goes up, stays up for a while, and then they maybe come down to a normalized state and then go back up again for a while, and then they may come back down, and then they go down, depression for a while, and then they kind of come back up. It seems like does it not seem like an easy distinction? Like, I feel like people get confused way too easily on that.
I mean, the way that you described it, that makes a lot more sense. It seems a lot easier to diagnose in the fact that it is a longer term up and down. It's more of a gradual curve, where this is more of a kind of like to me, the way you describe borderline personality is like that Richter thing when an earthquake, where it's just up, down, up, down, up, down, up, down. And it's
chaotic.
That's crazy.
It's chaotic. But I cannot tell you how many times in my work with people that I have come across bipolar people where I just ask that question when I'm getting to know them to see, like, what's going on here. Well, how often do you go up and stay up? Oh, just a few days. I'm done. I don't need to know anything else. You're not bipolar. You're more than likely something's been missed. And sometimes it's not always, BPD people. It could be other things too, but I just can't make that distinction strong enough because I see that all the time, right? So those are the basics of what we're looking for, what we're looking out for. I want to blow through some of this neurology thing because I'm looking at the time already, and I'm like, dude, we, as usual, I have so much that I want to put out on this, which is why, oh my gosh, Neil, we'd be about done with segment 1 right now. This would be the whole day.
Tune in tomorrow.
Right. I'm glad you called me out for that, man. I ain't gonna lie. He did his producer job literally just today, guys. He's like, I really think that it's okay to do the 1 hour deal. I'm like, Well, we can change it now if we want. So I promise we won't be jerking you all around, though. We're going to be slow in making changes. So the neurology thing I was talking about, okay? There's a really cool, we have some really cool articles that I found in my search on this that I really want you to check out, guys, because it's new information that I think if you're a clinician listening to this, you really want to check out to begin getting what my long-term suspicions with this have been are kind of coming to be more clear as we get brain imaging ability. A lot of this genetic reality comes from brain imaging ability that we've developed in science. Now, that is controversial. That is not definitive. So we are still really confused about the origin and the nature of all of the access to personality disorders that I was mentioning before. But I think there's pretty convincing stuff that they're looking at. I'm actually going to go through this quickly and read some of it because it's going to make me sound really smart, Craig, or Neil. Did it again. Dude, I did it again. That's the way my brain works.
Well, if you think I'm as buff as Craig, I'll take it as a compliment.
It definitely works out really well. It's a shame that we didn't get the video going quicker, to get him. Anyway, over the past decade, much of the literature concerning the biological basis of BPD has been shifted to direct visualization of brain structure and functioning as using neuroimaging, right? The meta-analysis of functional MRI. That's fMRI. There's so many brain scans that we have. They're finding in persons with BPD heightened activation during processing of negative emotional stimulus in the left amygdala, left hippocampus, and posterior cingulate cortex, as well as the diminished activation in prefrontal regions. That makes me sound smart, doesn't it?
It does.
Right? I even struggle with the cingulate cortex. I didn't know what the posterior cingulate cortex is. Did you know that?
Absolutely not.
You should see his face, guys. He's like, what?
Anatomy is not my thing. Just ask my wife. That's a whole nother thing. I'll leave that to my wife and her. She's more about that than I am.
Nice. But the reason why I read that there is listen to the details brain scanning left side of these different portions of our brain. That to me, when I read that a few days ago when I was prepping for this, Neil, I was like, oh my God, that's so cool. Like we're beginning to understand the very specific regions of the brain and what they do. And when we can see particularly findings with people revealed heightened activation during processing of negative emotional stimuli. Now that is what they live in. Poor self-image, right? Poor self-esteem. They oftentimes borderline people will feel a vast sense of emptiness, vastly alone, right? I mean, those are powerful, powerful features that are attacking them all the time. Doesn't it sound terrible to live that way?
It does. It sounds horrible.
It is so tough. Like, if you can imagine your most stressed moment being strung out through the course of a day for several days in any given week, that'll wear you out with emotion. And that's what they're dealing with. I just want this all the time. They've also done some family studies that I'm going to kind of blow by and say that, those twin things, they've done a lot of studies with that and found variations that clearly indicate genetic input, genetic factors, genetic statistics. There's a lot of biological things in play. Have I made that case strong enough or clear enough?
Yeah, you have.
Like that's a mind blow for a lot of clinical people. I would venture to guess if you took 1,000 clinicians in my field and asked them, are there significant factors with genetics with access to disorders? A certain high percentage would be like, no, that's more life experiences, right? That's more, the abuse and what you do to develop coping skills when you've gone through bad life events. And that's a part of it. But we are really, really finding, and I've always really felt that there's a big biological factor there that is completely missed. And thus, the BPD person is blamed.
And it's interesting when you talk about the brain scans and the physical nature of the brain. Well, your genetics is what makes that. So to me, those more recent findings leads toward the more influence on the nature side, because that's your genetics. That's what you were formed with, and that's how your brain handles it and receives it and processes it. Because you're seeing the physical, representation of those things. Unless they are physically abused and that damages that side of the brain, to me, nature makes more sense because it's a physical thing inside the brain.
Yeah, and I've always just thought as a young clinician, I mean, there are a lot of people that have all kinds of terrible traumas. We do talk about, we just got done with 2 weeks of police trauma. Well, I mean, dude, they get a lot of trauma. It's not breeding borderline personality disorder situations. Otherwise, arguably, all of our men and women in blue would be borderline. No jokes, anybody out there, they're not. They're really good people that are grounded but have a lot of trauma. So that, to me, even as a young clinician, you just laid it out perfectly, I feel like. That is not just what your life experiences are and your reactions. There's something else that was always missing in my mind that's driving the way your biological, emotional system is working. There's another article that we got out here from NCBI. What does NCBI stand for? I forget. The other one came from psychiatrictimes.com. These neurology things are absolutely fascinating to me. I need to get another neurologist on here and talk, because we could just go forever on some of that stuff.
That'd be like a two week episodes. Part 1, part 2.
Yeah, oh yeah, or 3, or 4
a month.
Yeah, right. Anything I want to get from this other article. Let me see. Oh, this was the second one here from, what is National CB? I forget. It's a pretty good national group that does a lot of studies. Yeah, to Google that. NCBI. What does NCBI stand for? That's going to bother the crap out of me. Anyway.
It's the National Center for Biotechnology Information.
Thank you. They have a lot of good psychological stuff out there. It's a highly prevalent psychiatric disorder that carries a severe risk factor for adolescent and young adult suicide. Okay? Listen, that's one of the reasons why there's so much misunderstanding out there about borderline personality disorder people. This is point number 1. And we'll have a brainstorm that I went through that examines why people are misunderstood. Adolescent and young adults will complete the act of suicide or make multiple attempts with suicidal ideations. And that's why this is such a serious issue, because there are real realities that they will play out in completing the acts of suicide with cutting and various suicidal gestures that they'll engage in, seemingly, Neil, on simple life events.
But it doesn't sound like with them,
it's not simple.
The simple life events are a lot more dramatic.
Right.
The perceptions, how they take those events in, how they process it. It's just, I could see that constant draining and wearing of being just overwhelmed. It's like having a car that either you're going, redlining it, or you're stopping it, or you're redlining and stopping it. That's very wearing, and that's where it leads these people. And then on top of that, the misunderstanding that you've talked about, that, if you have a borderline personality, the people you're talking to don't understand it. They don't know, like, really what it's like to have that extreme of emotions or that extreme high-low in such a short time. So,
and if you're close to them, you're receiving their attacks.
Mm-hmm. And then they just, drama queen, or they're just, they're so dramatic. They overreact all the time. That's what I could see a lot of the, family members, friends would say. Well, how do you deal with your situations when that's how they start treating you? Where do you turn to? It's very, very wearing. I just hear wearing over and over. And so that I could see where the suicide rate is higher, just because it's misunderstood. They're not getting the help they need. It's hard to cope with because it's not really out there yet. It doesn't seem like so,
and it's hard to treat.
Mm-hmm.
There are no approved medications for borderline personality disorder. Did you hear that?
Yeah,
there are no approved medications specifically for that. Now, Don't get me wrong. They'll get on medications to help them mitigate their mood, stabilize things. Some of the bipolar medications can apply. It can be very helpful. It's a tool. But it's hard to treat. It really is hard to treat, which is a good segue to what these articles, a lot of times you'll hear people claiming, or not claiming, well, yeah, I'm going to say claiming. I guess I tipped my hand. There's something called dialectical behavioral therapy that we use to treat. And essentially what dialectical behavioral therapy is, if you have borderline or are listening to this, that you'll be referred to, it's just type of treatment that goes really right along with a lot of the cognitive behavioral therapy that is done typically. Behavioral strategies and cognitive strategies. They go through 4 modules: core mindfulness, distress tolerance, interpersonal effectiveness, and emotion regulation. And a lot of times you're doing this in groups. So the mindfulness, which we've talked about on the show way before you came around, right?
Yeah.
Which we should redo, kind of touch back on that because it's so core. They will do the core mindfulness module, which is like a few weeks in a group, and then they'll go back and do the next one, emotion regulation. And then they'll go back and do core mindfulness again. And then go to the next one and do distress tolerance. And then go do core mindfulness again, you see? And they'll pop back to that one always. Because basically, if you can really learn and focus on being mindful, calm, and in the moment, in real time, that is a very, very important key to managing borderline personality disorder. Because guess what? Emotions take you completely out of the moment, raging somewhere else.
Right, and if you can't control how you react to that,
Zoom, zoom, zoom.
I think my kid's karate teacher said you can't control how you feel, but you can control how you react. And that's kind of even teaching the younger kids. I think that's really great to see because that goes back to that mindfulness that you mentioned. Those, if you are struggling with the emotions that you can't control, you can try to control how you react to them. And I think that mindful, like I said, going back to mindfulness repeatedly, even when you look at, distress tolerance, you have to be mindful of that distress to build tolerance to. So that all ties together. And so I think I like that idea that that's the way that they teach because it is mindfulness, like you said, is such a big part of your day-to-day life and it should be. And I don't think a lot of people pay attention to that as much as they should.
Can you imagine, again, for just a moment, you and I probably struggle greatly to be mindful. Right? It's hard.
Mm-hmm.
I'm thinking of what I'm going to have for dinner, what I got to do tomorrow. We've talked about that. Can you imagine if your emotional experience inside yourself was multiplied by 5 at least, and all those things you're thinking about, right, are that much more pressing to you? Can you see and begin to understand, like, how hard it is to be mindful in the moment?
It's very hard, and that's why it takes a lot of. You have to be mindful about being mindful.
That's a good phrase.
And you have to really push it because it is so hard now. I mean, nowadays, technology, social media, we've talked about that on the show. There's so many things that distract you from focusing and paying attention that you're really handicapped in today's society with all of that stuff. And then on top of that, if you do have the borderline personality, now you have the emotions to go with it. So you're really like it's a double handcuff. Your hands and your feet this time. So yeah, mindfulness is a hard thing to practice,
Especially when things are just firing at all firing levels and you're just wrapped up in the chaos of the moment inside my head. If you could be inside my head, feeling all the things I'm feeling, you wouldn't know how to cope either.
Right. And that's why I think you talked about medication. I'm not a big proponent of medication to live on, but I think you always say it great that medication is a tool. Yeah. And I've had people that have, ADD, I would say ADHD, but you pointed out last time, that's not really. But because of what they dealt with, the medication allowed them a closer sense of normalcy for them, that it wasn't as overwhelming. They could then come in and deal with the coping mechanisms, or how do I handle those triggers? How to do that? And so medication's a great tool, I think, to get started, but it comes back to repeatedly practicing mindfulness and those other, the distress tolerance and interpersonal effectiveness, emotion regulation. Medication allows them to not be so all over the place.
Right, exactly.
So they can't.
Exactly. Yeah, you are nailing it. That's impressive. Okay, so we're about halfway through now, and I'm going to talk about marriage for a little bit, and then I want to talk about my brainstorm on what makes this so misunderstood. Let me check in with you at halftime. You want to push the buttons and do the techno stuff, right? How you doing over there, co-host? Are we doing a good job?
Yeah, I think we're doing actually really good. This is fun. Doing it a little bit different this time.
Yeah, it's so. It just blows me away that, just talking to you before the mics, that you have somebody that's close to you. I have somebody that I know is close to me, and of course not several clients and all. Like, if you're listening to this and you are wondering about it, it is really hard to kind of be close to somebody and try to bring this up or manage this. Right? You should see his face, guys. He just threw his head back like, yeah. Very, very stigmatized this thing is. The shame that's involved in this, probably more than most mental health diagnoses or mental health issues, because of the suicidal thoughts and because of the difficulty in personality, because of the erratic, impulsive type things that you experience. Like, but let me switch this around. Can it not be beautiful? Can it not be really cool? Can it not be something? These are amazing people. Like, if you want the breadth and the full scope of life, it is amazing how passionate these folks can be. Men and women, by the way, another stigma blown. We feel like this is always women. No. No. You know what men get called when we have these things going on? Antisocial personality disorder. Men get diagnosed with antisocial. Women get diagnosed bipolar or borderline. See, I even have them interchanged in my brain, when I'm thinking or talking. Men are this way too, and they're passionate. When they care about you, they really, really care about you. When they care about something, they are all over it. I mean, they get a lot of stuff done. They make stuff happen. And they also, and we'll get to this, are really, really perceptive. Did you know that about borderline? The perceptive ability? Think about it. Their emotions are raging. They've had trauma a lot of times in some ways in their life. And they have had to pipe their emotional survival skills to another level. And they are scanning and perceiving your personality, your mood, your presentation, like, precisely. I mean, they are all over. When I'm in therapy with borderline personalities, oftentimes they know my mood of that day. Right?
If they have a heightened sense of emotions and a heightened sense. I mean, my wife does that on her own. She's very in tune to people.
Yeah.
So I can just imagine someone who really constantly high levels of the different things. I could see them catching on to a lot of things that most people could hide.
They notice.
Yeah.
They notice. And therapists are trained, I mean, I'm more free on this show a little bit. I think it's fair to say. I'm pretty genuine in session with people too. But, dude, I if I'm in a sad mood or down or something's going on, generally they're going to know it. And they'll ask me about it, Neil. They'll be like, you okay today, man? Is there anything going on for you? And inside my head, I'm like, oh my gosh, no. Yeah. What happened? and younger clinicians are really freaked by that. They're like, oh my gosh, what do I do with this? Well, I control it and manage it, but I'm pretty genuine because I know there's no sense in trying to hide something, because you know what happens when you hide something?
You break that trust wall, doesn't it?
Absolutely. They already have a hard time trusting people. If you sit there and you're putting off these cues, even as a therapist, and they're like, yo, I know you're worked up on something. And I say, oh, no, everything's fine. What's up? Immediately, you're a threat. You're a threat to me, they say. And I don't trust you. So what's really going on? So they're really amazing people. They're beautiful people. So, okay, marriage. I'm going to kind of blow through their ideas and listen to these closely, Neil, see what you think about these. This was actually this article's idea of, what to do in sort of tips when you're dealing closely with folks that are struggling with their emotions that are ranging this much, right? Get information. Okay, sounds good. Get help. Sounds excellent. Healthy communication. I don't even know what that means. I mean, that's hard to try to model. It's hard to do. Fourth, ask open-ended questions rather than directive questions. And the article kind of made a good case for this, but I'm kind of like, wow, like that's opening Pandora's box a little bit. But what they're saying is help them to talk through all that they're feeling, and don't give closed-ended directive questions, because then you're going to be making them feel like they're wrong and all that kind of stuff. So it's a good tip, but it has its pitfalls. Talk only when things are calm. That one is huge, right? Offering support. Okay. Pause. Therapy fact. When working with borderline personality disorder, I actually learned this from a couple colleagues that really loved working with this, and I remember this very clearly from them. 3 words, all the same word. Validate, validate, validate. Like, they need a lot of love and care and support through validation. If you're feeling up and you're feeling down, you're feeling all around, you know what you're feeling, I need to validate that that's okay. What you're feeling is real, and you validate, validate, validate. So when this article says offer support, I'm going to say validate, validate, validate. That it is that huge when you're in a relationship with those folks. Avoid labeling or blaming. Hard to do. Good thought. Really good thought here. Take the threats seriously. We know that with suicidal thoughts, but threats as well. Like, don't get to a point where, you always say you're going to do that. You never do that, or whatever. No, it really needs to be taken seriously every time, which is part of validating, by the way. And then the last one that I really, really, really liked what they said in their article was the cornerstone of mental health. Co-host quiz. Have I ever heard me say this yet? I'm curious.
Self-care.
Yes!
I heard that a lot in
Yeah.
the police experience. You were talking about that.
Oh, that's
so
right.
So yeah, and like I said, I had to listen to those a lot to get them out there. So
You did.
Heard a lot about self-care. It's huge.
Listen, if you're going to be married to someone with borderline personality disorder, it can be done. You can be very happy. You can get grounded, live a normal life. Absolutely. Particularly if you're working through these things. But you have got to take care of yourself. It is not, it's the cornerstone of mental health in my view. It's just not an option. But unfortunately, one of the things that happens is, you get so drained by this. You get so, kind of emotionally wore out. And, you want to help them. You just forget to help yourself.
Yeah, you see that with a lot of caregivers where they neglect themselves because their priority is the other person. But it goes back to that idea, just like an airplane. When the air things fall down, what do they say? Put your mask on first before you help anyone else. That's how it is in life. If you're not taking care of yourself, you can't help other people. So that's huge.
And not that they are draining, I guess, because emotion is draining. If you have a lot of emotion, the other person has a lot of emotion, even times 5, it is draining. So because there's a lot of emotional drain, it becomes even more, that important and valuable. So what do you think about the articles list there? I kind of made some comments and stuff, but curious how you see that. Only talk when things are calm. Blaming, labeling, be careful, avoid it. Taking threats seriously. Doing self-care, get information, get help, healthy communication, ask open-ended questions. Again, talk only when things are calm. Definitely some good things in there. What do you hear?
I know this is about borderline personality disorder, but those sound like a lot of things marriages should be having anyways. The healthy communication, you kind of made a little aside to that. And to me, healthy communication is where you literally state what's going on. It's not... you take a lot of these things they say to avoid doing. Healthy communication is, hey, you're bothering me, or you did this, or I did that, or here's what I want. It really is a back and forth. It is,
right.
It is a thing to where you have that trust with the other person, and you're comfortable expressing yourself. They're comfortable expressing back. To me, that's a healthy communication. And I think that's, for someone with borderline personality, with the way you've described it, the trust that they have to have with their partner. And like you said, they can hit those cues. So if you're not being honest with them and you're kind of hiding your stuff, well, they're not going to be open and honest with you. And so,
they're perceiving it.
Exactly. So that's really, honestly, like I said, this is a lot of things that you should have in a marriage, at least as far as I believe. And then if you have someone who has a heightened sense of emotions like they do, up and down, it's going to magnify anything that's not healthy in a relationship because of that personality disorder that they have.
I think that we landed in a very similar place when I was checking out this article and preparing, because you're saying that a marriage is going to have this anyway. I think you're right. And my thought was, these things are hard to do in typical terms.
Very hard.
Right? All of them are. And as you say, when something is heightened, it's even more difficult. And so, yeah, you know what borderline personality disorder treatment really is about? Managing emotions. How hard is that for typically to be doing? When it's times 5, it's times 5 difficult. And that's the challenge. That's why these people are not poor emotion managers. As a matter of fact, they're probably way better at managing emotion than you and I, because they have so much of it. How's that for a bold statement?
Oh, I can see that.
Yeah, Yet they have the myth that they just suck at living. They can't even do adulting.
I can't even do adulting.
Right? Right? I literally I think I could do this. I do this from time to time. It's a long time ago. One of the things that tipped me off to one of the people I was working with that had borderline personality disorder is they had their perfume dropped in the bathroom and shattered on the floor. They lost their shit. They could not, excuse my bad word there, they could not handle, they lost it. Right? Well, there was a lot going on in that. How many people dropped something shattered?
Oh, yeah. And
I shattered my wife.
Some of those perfumes are expensive, too.
Exactly. Well, right. Doesn't that bring on a lot of emotion? Right? I was going to say, I shattered my wife's bowl a few years ago, and oh my God, that was terrifying. Her brand new pottery bowl.
Yeah, I broke my wife's flower basket. She was not happy. I was roughhousing with the boys. The one thing I thought that was interesting, which I think is a really cool option, is the ask open-ended questions. Because I feel like, based on what I've seen and what you've talked about in this, giving them a chance to kind of express themselves without you guiding them.
Yeah.
That can be really huge for building a strong relationship. Because if you're saying, well, do you think you feel like this? Or, well, maybe you should feel this. That's not good for someone who's already struggling. And if you say, what do you feel like? Or really, how did that make you really feel? Or what's going on about it? That really allows them to express it. And the more they express and the more you listen to them, that the early struggles about not being understood and those suicidal thoughts and being alone, that helps deal with those, because they actually feel they can open up. And there's an empathy and a sympathy that starts building with it, that those open-ended questions can do that. They're comfortable with how they feel. You're not judging them because you're directing the correct question. So I think that's a really neat tip, even for a marriage in general. Like I said, these are great things for marriages in general.
Right.
What if you ask your wife, I'm sorry that happened. How did that make you feel? Versus like, oh, why do you even think that way? Or, there's a certain thing but like you said, because of the heightened personality, it's going to be more emphasized. But these are great things you should be doing in marriage anyways. And
they really are.
It just, when you have someone with borderline personality disorder, it becomes more prevalent and you have to be this way, as opposed to, well, sometimes you can kind of act that way with your spouse.
It becomes more important because it's just more intense. Absolutely. Mm-hmm. And I'm just going to let that stand, because I don't have much to add to that. I think that's perfectly said, Neil. Really. I think that's perfectly said. Let's spend the rest of our time on really lasering in on why they're misunderstood. Kind of come full circle with the title of this, right? Why is borderline personality disorder so misunderstood? This is my brainstorm, and I'd be curious what you can do with me, Neil, and figuring this out together, right? Things often change, and change rapidly, right? Does that not lead to being misunderstood? Well, I thought you just told me this. Now you're telling me that. I don't know what you mean.
I'm sure they're probably told that they're fickle or they waffle a lot.
Right.
And that can be very frustrating when people think that, they don't take you right seriously.
Right.
And so that can be very frustrating when that's the perception they have towards you.
Largely misunderstood. And you know what? Their emotion is fickle a little bit, right? Well, their emotion is all over the place. They get sad and happy and mad and glad and all sorts of things very, very quickly. So that leads to a lot of arguments, a lot of fights, a lot of hurt, a lot of terrible pain, for both the person who is experiencing it and the person who is receiving it, right? Things change, and they change rapidly. Leads to great misunderstandings. I think that's a strong point. My second idea is things can be really good when they're good. I mean, they're passionate, fun people. I love working with borderline people. They are fun. They really are. They laugh and enjoy stuff and are passionate about things. I mean, when they're up, boy, they are. Let's go. This. Why you got to think about it? Why do you have to plan it? Let's go. Let's have fun.
The adventures.
Adventurous.
That you can have. Yeah.
It's a great word, right? But boy, it just creates so much strong sense of desperation. Equally so when things are bad. Like, I can't function kind of bad. The world is evil. Things are dark. You are dark. You, my spouse, you don't even care about me. You, as a matter of fact, I think you hate me. That doesn't make much sense day to day. It's hard to, that creates some misunderstanding.
Yeah.
There's an awesome book I didn't point out, by the way, on marriage. OMG, this book is almost a must if you have BPD in a marriage system at all. Did I get the author? I think I screwed up. Walking on Eggshells is the name of it. Yeah, okay. Stop Walking on Eggshells. I didn't get the author. We'll make sure and get that on the show notes and stuff, though. But Stop Walking on Eggshells. I think the current one is the 3rd edition. They have awesome tips in there. I mean, seriously, like, it's a must-read book if you're dealing with this. It's also a classic. You go back to the original edition. I don't know when it came out, but it's been out for a while. I've referred people. I'm not good about referring people to books, but this is a good one. Hey, we need to get that on the affiliate list. Can we do that?
Yeah.
It will be. Good. He's the technical guy, guys. He's like, it will be. Because it is a must. Stop Walking on Eggshells. So number 3 on my list of what creates, confusion and what gets misunderstood is just that. I mean, they question every nuance. I mentioned that earlier today. They are trying to survive. They are trying to emotionally survive the event in front of their face. And so they are looking at every little nuance to find and be proactive in something that they just know is going to cause them great pain. I mean, Neil, if you are knowing that if this happens or that happens, if I pull out a banana and you're going to fall out in welts if you smell it in this room, you're just going to itch for the next 7 days and have bad hiccups in combination if I pull out a banana. How alarmed are you going to be at looking at bananas in this room?
Very.
Right. They are looking for all the little emotional nuances, all the little emotional triggers that will absolutely cause them great pain, and they know it will because it's happened in their life over and over and over again. So if they're overreading things a little bit, understand why. Because they don't want to have hiccups and welts and itch for 7 days. Did I go too far with that metaphor? Does that work?
You probably could have said like peanuts instead, but the banana was a little weird. But
The banana's weird.
you don't really hear a lot about banana allergies, but peanut allergies, that's kind of more common known. So that would have been. And then thanks for bringing up the hiccups again.
I know, right?
Thanks.
You know why somebody this is awesome. I was actually working with somebody today. You know what? This was a subconscious thing. I didn't think about it till now. You said that, and immediately my brain was like, why don't I just pick bananas? Somebody told me today that they haven't been to work. There's been a pandemic, Neil, right?
Right.
So they haven't been to work to get to their locker, and they know they have a banana in there. Oh my gosh, a year later you go back to your locker and you get a banana that's been in the locker with your sweatshirt and your coat. Doesn't that sound terrible?
My friend left like an orange and something in his locker for a whole semester.
There you go.
It was not good when they had to clean it out.
No, not at all. The misperceptions and misunderstandings occur because also listen, these folks that are dealing with this type of emotional distress do not see or feel what you see, what you perceive, what you feel. They don't. You can tell them, I love you. And they will say, your ear moved a little bit to the left. No, you don't. You're like, no, like, you're a beautiful person, and I am lucky to be married to you. And they're like, yeah, no, you forgot the tomatoes yesterday. You didn't even get the tomatoes. I asked you to get tomatoes. Clearly, you don't even care about what I say. Like, I'm ugly, by the way, too. Really. I don't compare to anybody that I've ever seen. Yet you're trying to tell me that I'm beautiful? Just tell me I'm good looking. Don't try to patronize me. Right? I mean, can you hear this dialogue? It's like, they just don't see it. They don't get it. They don't believe it. They can't trust it inside themselves. And it creates so many misunderstandings. And a lot of times it tends to be really like not just devaluing, but grossly devaluing themselves.
I kind of think about, we are our own worst critic, and going back to the emotions times 5.
Right.
Right. That's what I'm kind of thinking, because I talk to my wife and I do the same thing, blah blah blah. And she's like, whatever. You're just saying that because you love me, all those things. But I could just see what these people with their emotions times 5, times 10, like that's the reality of it.
It is intensely overwhelming. Great self-doubt leaves doubt or not trusting others. Trust. I did that all caps in the show notes, you see, right? Like, whew. If there was a single most important issue, probably, almost maybe besides mindfulness, trust and trusting and being trustworthy, coupled with validate, like trust is right up there with those concepts. It is a huge, huge reality to try to trust things. I mean, if you can't trust your own perception because you're looking at every nuance, it's just, I don't know. I don't even know what else to say about that. It's such a profound reality with, being able to feel, to be able to trust somebody is a big, big step for a borderline personality disorder person. And boy, when you reach those times, and they do, how awesome that is. That is a huge step, particularly in a healthier marriage where you're getting some levels of trust together. And I've seen this. It is awesome to watch develop and blossom. Unpredictable irritability. I mean, how are you supposed to have predictability with irritability that ranges and becomes unpredictable with like that wave in the metaphor of water? That's going to create misunderstandings. That's almost like, how could it not, right? Like, I think we did a show on emotions lie to us. We did, didn't we? I think that was before you a little bit too.
Oh, I'll look that one up.
Emotions lie to us. It was a good episode to probably play off of this because, when the irritability is going, it's going to create lots of conflict. And the next thing that plays off of that creates misunderstanding is if emotions generally lie to us, or they can, we did decision making, trust your gut or use your head, right? Like which by the way, see how these shows play off on each other?
Mm-hmm.
Right? That's purposeful, folks. That's purposeful. Like, if emotions have strong tendency to lie to us and our emotions are ranging, then they have a lot of ranging up and down potential increased to lie to us and make us see and feel things that aren't there. I mean, you see how that all works together with, boy, is this difficult to manage. Okay. What's next? How we have misunderstandings and how borderline personality disorders misunderstood. High occurrence with other problems. Listen, a lot of times there is PTSD. Trauma experience with this is high. Particularly if you're putting yourself in high-risk situations because you're impulsive, you tend to get not simple trauma. Remember, we've talked about compound trauma. Isn't that a lot more complicated?
Oh, yeah.
When you put yourself in situations where trauma is likely to happen, well, shoot. Now you just doubled or tripled or quadrupled down on tough things to process emotionally. So other disorders and problems are likely a part of this. So it gets confusing. I've been diagnosed with bipolar disorder, right? Yeah, I'm misunderstood. misdiagnosed, even. Terrible misunderstandings. So let me see. Lots and lots of stigma associated with this. Lots and lots of stigma. They do not, even amongst professionals, I mean, Neil, these guys and gals do not get a fair shake. They really do not get a fair shake. If I could, like, throw into the universe a bomb to blow up a stigma about borderline personality disorders being difficult to treat, difficult to manage, something I don't want to deal with, how can I do that, man? You know, because these people need love and care and support just as much as anybody else does. And they end up chasing a lot of people away and pushing a lot of people away. I mean, they will blow up on their friends, and then they're left isolated. You know?
I mean, just imagine them having to be themselves. They blow up their relationships, and their friends will leave. But the people who have the personality disorder, they have it within themselves. They can't just leave, like a friend or a spouse or
and they don't
a
get a break.
Exactly, and it's very hard, and without being in their shoes, it's hard for those people on the outside to do it, and it gets very wearing for them. And really, what there needs to be is more sympathy for. If I'm seeing this on the outside, imagine what they're doing on the inside.
Right.
And that's very hard for a lot of people to take that time and to be faithful in those relationships. It's a struggle.
Yeah, really good tough point. Just imagine if you're observing, what are they feeling? Yeah, I love that. You got a therapist takeaway there, brother. Good job. That's awesome. They also, I mentioned this already before, they have amazing survivor skills, likely due to the trauma that they're experiencing. So, you know, it creates misunderstandings because they're inevitably going to feel pain. So they're going to get you before you get them. They know you're after them, quote unquote, air quotes, right? Like, they know you're after them. So they're going to beat you to the punch. Hands down, no doubt. Okay, lastly, you know, this is huge. Can they change? Can they really be mindful? Can they really be grounded? Can they make sense and be rational? The answer is yes. Yes, yes. Like, absolutely. You know, don't expect anybody to be on their game at all times, you know, but there's a belief that they're doomed and they're just not going to be, you know, a sane member of society living amongst us because they've been so erratic and they've blown different things up and they feel that inside. If you have been struggling with this type of stuff with borderline personality disorder and you can be within my range of my voice anywhere in the world, I want you to know that absolutely life is not a bowl of roses. It's not just peaches and cream. There's all kinds of stress and turmoil that's out there, but you absolutely can learn the skills and then be really strong in them in order to be those things of grounded and mindful. I mean, get into DBT, get into therapy, get into praying, get support, let people into your inner world and don't be alone. And you really can chase this trauma that chases you into your nightmares away and deal with the suicidal thoughts that seem so chronic. I mean, there are people that are 60, 70 years old that have been dealing with this their whole life, right? So the earlier that you begin to really recognize my emotions are scrambled, maybe more so than others, and I can do something about it, boom, like that's cool, right?
Very cool. And I think the key with when you do get the mindfulness and you get the practices in place, what works for you, because everyone's different. You're going to come out better than what other people would consider normal in society because they practice things that a lot of people need to practice. And if they get it and they put the time in to do it, you know, they'll be better than most people in society, honestly. It just goes back to diligence, perseverance, finding what works for you, and then sticking to it. It's going to be a long road, but like you said, it can be done. Anyone can overcome these types of things. It just sometimes it takes longer, and sometimes it's just finding that right thing. You know, you gave a whole list of stuff. You know, meditation might work for one person, breathing for someone else, yoga,
The methodical
sports.
management of mental health.
Exactly. You just have to find what works for you, and it's finding the people that you can talk to, like you said, build that trust with, and explain what's going on, get it off your chest, and talk to other people. Find that circle, because maybe in this case, you need more than one person. It's one of those things you might have to build a consortium of people, a network of people, because it is overwhelming for you, and it's going to be overwhelming for your friends. You have more friends, the more you can express as you deal with it. That could be a great thing so you're not overwhelming one person. You have more people you can rely on, and you're building that trust. That can be a huge thing for someone.
Well put and well said. I have not much to add to that. Absolutely. I gave my passionate plea there to take advantage of what's out there for you, and I think you just followed that up super well. I think that we need to taxi in and get out of here. Neil, promise not to call you Craig anymore tonight. Any thoughts, summary points, or questions about what we're talking about here?
I don't think so. Well, only question is how recent has borderline personality kind of been even brought into the whole mental health aspect? I mean, within how many years would you say borderline personality versus bipolar versus some of those other ones?
That's interesting. It is a really good question. And for a long time, I think my whole career, back in the early versions of what we now have as DSM-5, we had DSM-4 revised forever. DSM-4, I graduated, college in the early 90s, and it was already in existence then. And I suspect well before that, because the reputation of dealing with borderline was well in place and entrenched. It wasn't anything new about it. And it hasn't really changed. So you didn't ask this, but interesting component of that is when we came up, we waited for about 10 years for ours to go to our Diagnostic and Statistical Manual. That's what DSM stands for. From 4 to 5, we waited like a decade, 15 years, like forever. And when it came out, they didn't do anything to this. This has left it the same. No changes. It was literally word for word the same, that I read you in the beginning when we were looking at the criteria. Because we don't know what to do with it. That's why I say I don't think science understands this either. The fact that it's genetic is probably new to a lot of people. And so it's been around for a long time, and we really kind of don't understand the neurology of it. You don't want to know what my theory is?
What?
I really feel like I'm glad I could document this on a podcast, because many years from now, we may kind of come back to this. I really feel like a lot of these access to personality disorders have a lot to do with hormones.
I could see that.
Yeah. I feel like it's a genetic imbalancing of those ingrained chemicals, which has a lot to do with neurology that I don't think we have a freaking clue about. These hormone structures, I suspect, are just raging, and with the different personality disorders, raging in different kind of ways. So, yeah. But I got nothing to back that up with, folks.
That sounds like a fun topic for another episode, because I think hormones and chemicals in the brain are very complex and very, very interesting.
We've taken some stabs at it, but it's definitely a tough one. Listen, I'm going to wrap it up with, if you have borderline personality disorder out there, do not be alone. If you know someone dealing with borderline personality disorder, validate, love and support them. Don't take things personally. We didn't even mention that. Don't take things personally. Be careful about that. Love and care about them. We all need it. We all need that social support network. This the psychobabble words, Neil, that you mentioned before with a network. Join it, guys. Be with them and join them. All right? We are still with Through a Therapist's Eyes. Looking forward to seeing you guys again. Sorry about the confusion with multiple shows in a week. We're going to stay with this 1 hour version, which suits us better. We hope that it suits you better. Have a great week, and we will talk to you soon.